We are now moving into the afternoon session. We have two elements to this, two parts to this. One is a panel session to discuss consumer take-up and choice, which will be led by Lloyd Felton. And then we end the conference with a speech by Matt Warman, the Minister for Digital Infrastructure, a little bit later. But first, we've got another video interview from Calix. So this is between Brian Dolby and Bo Larsen. Bo will be joining the panel afterwards.
We start the afternoon session with a video interview with Bo Larsen of Calix. Bo, consumer choice is a word we hear a lot, and I guess it means different things to different people, particularly around broadband. What does consumer choice mean to Calix?
Thank you, Brian. It means obviously that the consumer has to have a good and reliable broadband access, that is for sure. But we like to see it go a little bit further than that and give consumers not only choice of which ISP they wish to use for their broadband and their television access, but also have choice from the ISP in terms of maybe some additional services they want. One thing is to get fast and reliable broadband, which is great. One thing is to get access to the content that you want. But especially these days with lockdown and COVID and increasing number of people working from home, we believe that ISP should actually offer more choice to subscribers in terms of additional services, in terms of, for example, securing their network. So when we are increasingly online, we want to make sure that we're also protected against malicious activities, generally speaking, ransomware and what have we, which are out there. If I am a family and I have my children being online more than they would otherwise be, maybe doing homeschooling because the schools are closed, I want to make sure that when they're online, they're actually safe and they're actually protected. And in terms of consumer choice, those are things that I would be looking for in terms of what the ISP can offer me over and above just access to the internet and a trillion television channels and telephony.
Yeah, I mean, what makes a good consumer experience?
Excellent question. Obviously, it does start with the fast and reliable broadband. That's an absolute given. There's still some let's say some challenges in the UK and other countries, but they have a very ambitious program with a full fiber rollout by whatever it is, 2025 or a bit later. So that either has been or will be resolved. Once that is resolved, the good experience that subscribers should be looking at is, one thing is to get your whatever 1 gigabit service to the edge of your house into the gateway, but it needs to extend beyond that, because beyond the gateway, the router in your house, you have your in-home Wi-Fi network, and you have an increasing number of devices connected to that network. So the next step of the good experience is that network needs to be, let's say, high performance and reliable. Now, we in Calix believe the ISPs can play a role there by helping these subscribers overcome whatever challenges they may have in terms of having a good Wi-Fi network. But once that has been achieved, coming back to the previous question, the experience is also about, well, what other services could I potentially purchase or be offered by the ISP in terms of, for example, the network security, parental control that we spoke about, or maybe other services when you become very advanced and you have an increased number of devices at home. Maybe you have sort of smart home type devices that could be, let's say, managed or even provided by the ISP. So we think we would like to look at it more sort of, let's say, end-to-end experience, as opposed to just, hey, I'm getting you now a 1 gigabits per second fiber. Now that's all the experience you need. We think that's actually a little bit too narrow-minded.
Yeah, so you think there's a role for them, beyond providing just FTTP?
Absolutely. I think the ISPs have a real chance of stepping, or real opportunity to step up and actually promote their brand to the subscriber, as opposed to just being almost like a plumber or the provider of the internet access and stop there. I think they can add a lot more value. And if you look at it, let's say in the market in different countries, a lot of subscribers have very high confidence in their ISPs, in their service provider. And ISPs should take, let's say, benefit from that, saying, Mr. Customer, I give you the 1 gig fiber access, the broadband, but I can also help you make sure that you have a good coverage in your home in terms of the Wi-Fi, so that even in the remote areas of your house or your flat, to your iPhone or smartphone, whatever you have a 1 gig, or you have enough capacity going there as well. So you solve the coverage area or the coverage issue in the home. And in addition, I can protect you. I can sell you a service or provide you a service as part of your contract that protects your house. Network security is becoming very, very important these days. And we see also statistically, if you talk to some of the cybersecurity vendors, that the number of attacks and other malicious activity has increased greatly during these times of COVID. And security in the home, let's say cybersecurity, is really something that needs to be delivered on the router. It has to be delivered at the entry point to your network. You can no longer rely on endpoint protection, where each and every device has a piece of software that protects it. First of all, the number of devices are ever increasing, and it becomes pretty difficult to actually manage. So we believe the ISP can really add more value by providing those type of services directly on the ISP provided router, the entry to the home network.
So these companies, we might call them challenger firms, for example. For them to do that, what are the sort of challenges that they themselves would face in getting to that point?
Well, first of all, they need to provide obviously get the fiber in the ground or in the aerial fiber and provide the broadband access. And then again, I think they have a real interest in promoting their own brand and adding more value to the subscribers. To the point of the panel section that would follow, where we talk about consumer choice, it's more about consumer choice of ISP. If consumers have choice of the ISP they wish to buy a service from or take a subscription from, that also means competition. So if you can provide more value to the subscriber, you may, as an ISP, you may increase your chances of actually that subscriber selecting your services as opposed to somebody else that can only provide, let's say, regular internet access and access to television or other content.
And how can Calix help companies like this, achieve this aim?
Calix have a complete set of Wi-Fi 6 enabled routers and mesh devices that, first of all, can help the ISPs address the challenge of a proper in-home Wi-Fi network. We also provide, as part of that solution, some cloud-based analytics and cloud-based solutions so that Calix actually do the integration with a third party, for example, cybersecurity provider or a parental control solution. So we actually take the complexity away and we do the integration. We take care of the complexity, and not so the ISP can essentially put that service in their catalog. I, as a subscriber, will decide to buy it or subscribe to it, and the service is just implemented on the router in the subscriber's home without the ISP have to neither have a relationship with the third-party provider or do any technical work in terms of integrating it and make it available on the router. Calix do all that work. So we take a lot of complexity away from the ISP and let the ISP focus on providing value and elevating their brand in the mind of the subscriber, provide real value to the subscriber.
Well, as you say, we have an interesting session ahead. In the meantime, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Brian. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you very much. That was actually very useful indeed, and is a very helpful contribution towards the next panel session. So thank you to Calix, and thanks for Calix for sponsoring the conference. And it's great actually to have Calix back working with INCA. Calix is already working with our members, but it's great to have Calix back involved in INCA. Next, I'd like to invite Lloyd Felton onto the platform. Lloyd is the Chief Executive, I think the founder and Chief Executive of County Broadband, and is also an INCA board member. And Lloyd is leading the process of creating a new wholesale aggregator platform amongst independent network operators. So Lloyd, welcome. Would you like to introduce your panel?
Thank you, Malcolm. Certainly would. Thank you for the introduction, and welcome to everybody who's joined us. So on the panel today, we have a mix of independent network operators. We have one of the mainstream ISPs, and of course we have our a couple of product providers in Adtran and in Calix. So we'll start with Philip Lawrence from Airband. Philip, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello again, everybody. Non-exec director of Airband, building out fibre networks in the west of England.
Thank you very much indeed. And then we have Evan Wienburg from Truespeed. Evan, please come up onto the panel.
Hey, Lloyd. Hello, Philip. Hello, everybody.
In addition to Evan, we're also joined by Guy Miller from TalkTalk. Guy, welcome.
Yeah, hi Lloyd, nice to hear you. Yeah, Guy Miller, Product Director at TalkTalk.
As well as being obviously TalkTalk, Guy is the envy of just about everybody with the room that he works from. We've also invited Mike Locke to join us because we feel very much that this discussion is going to go and venture into the world of consumer-led switching. And on that basis, Mike has been doing a lot of work with INCA. So Mike, welcome to the panel.
Afternoon all, ready to serve.
Thank you very much. And Ronan Kenny from Adtran, a significant equipment provider in the UK. So Ronan, very nice to see you here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Lloyd, thanks for inviting me along today.
It's a pleasure. And Bo, thank you very much for the video from Calix, but it's also good to have you here in person.
Thank you, Lloyd. Pleasure being here. Thank you, everyone.
All right. So by way of a short introduction, encouraging consumer take-up and choice is, when I tried to think of this as to how we might introduce this and how important this was going to be, those of us that are old enough to remember VHS and Betamax and the battle that ensued will remember the battle was won not on the quality of the product, but actually on the content and the popularity of the product, where VHS won the day over what many of us thought was a better product, which was Betamax. And likewise, we think that consumer choice now is going to be driven, is it going to be driven by network quality and the capability of the network? And as Bo was talking about earlier, as the features available on it, or is it going to be driven by the content? And if it's going to be driven by the content, then what is the future of content delivery? So there's quite a lot for us to discuss. And in my view, consumer choice has multiple perspectives. We have to ask ourselves the question is, what does the consumer actually want? And alongside this, will the consumer be led by the introduction of consumer-led switching? Will that create new behaviors? Or actually, will it just solidify the existing ones where switching between existing networks carries on? I think the other perspective we need to think about is what choice do ISPs and CPs actually want to give their consumers? And alongside this, will there be a separation in an ISP, a CP, and a network operator? Are we happy to differentiate that as independent network providers is a question we have to ask ourselves. So lastly, I think that what we want to discuss probably will also tip into some legislative areas. And I was listening earlier to the discussion on this, and without doubt, there is this fear that should there be legislation that encourages switching between available networks, or are we content, as many have said, to live with the cartel existence of only certain services being delivered over certain networks, and therefore the opportunity to give consumer choice is entirely dependent on the network that we operate over? So I think we'll go into the panel at this point and we'll ask for a couple of views from those that have joined us. And if we start perhaps with yourself, Philip, what's your view on the separation between a content provider, an ISP, and a network operator?
Well, look, our view at our Airband at the moment is pretty simple. We are vertically integrated. We can see that in the future, wholesale will become necessary in our area, and we will support that, and it's a huge opportunity for us. But I think at the moment the fundamentals of the business are still being developed, which is rollout plans, good customer service, offering them speeds, which is in deep rural areas, which is kind of much better than the basic service that they're getting at the moment. Once you provided them broadband into their home, it's up to them with the choice of they can buy on additional services afterwards. So at the moment we are vertically integrated, and I think in our short-term business model it kind of stays like that.
It's interesting that so from your own view then, the wholesale market and the separation of the network itself from the delivery of services some way off.
Yeah, but it might be 5 years away. We all expect consolidation in the market, don't we? I think 5 years-ish as alternative network providers merge together. But until then, I think it's very much a land grab. And I think it's in the hands of the ISPs to see how, how keen they want to be to come into rural spaces and be a retailer.
Well, let's take that view then across, if I may, to Guy, representing TalkTalk today. Guy, Philip says that he sees it very much as a vertical market for the time being. I think that perhaps that's a view that is shared by many, but not all. What's your view?
So I think clearly that kind of vertical starting point is necessary to get a hold, to get that kind of all-important funding, get customers on board. I think if on most of the content I've seen today, the theme in every session has come back to wholesale. This seems to be a bit of a kind of watershed moment for INCA, who perhaps in the past have been very much reluctant to kind of entertain the wholesale as its standard business model, are now very much moving towards acceptance in the future. And that timing is probably the interesting point. For me, to even hear Ofcom earlier to say that actually getting the large ISPs involved in altnets sooner rather than later is going to help with the kind of overbuild challenges and things like that was quite fascinating. And it's a really interesting kind of viewpoint to see actually, I think the mindsets are evolving from maybe perhaps the wholesaler is perhaps the large ISP is the devil you have to deal with, to actually no, they're the enabler to your success. And certainly that's how we see it as TalkTalk. We absolutely believe in great connectivity for everyone in the country, and that is everyone in the country. We do not want a digital divide that is between rural and urban, and we do not want a digital divide that is between rich and poor. We believe everyone should have great connectivity, and altnets are a huge part to play in that. So I would be very disappointed if it took 5 years for us and others to be heavily involved in this sector. We've already signed up our first altnet, and I have no doubt we'll be doing more.
Yeah, I think we also have to consider those that, if you want to go with a vertically aligned market, then where does that place you in any government bidding, any contracts that are available, anything that's going on in the outside in program that we've yet to see. So there's some very clear choices for network operators as to which route they feel is the best route for them. I think if I was to ask a question about the technology that's being delivered across the network, as a panel, how do we feel the feature-rich nature? Do we think the feature-rich nature of what we're building and the excessive speeds of what we're offering, etc., is going to be enough to win that battle, to win the customer? Or is the customer going to demand more than that? What's your view on that, please, Evan?
Mic on. Firstly, I just need to apologise. There's a bunch of other meetings going on in my house at the same time, and my home office, which is at the bottom of my garden, is a 50 square metre unfinished building that stopped in March, about 6 weeks before it was meant to be finished. So there's guys in the garden right now.
Very nice.
Right. So your question is, what do customers want? Okay.
My question is.
It is.
My question is, what do customers want? Do they want feature-rich
Okay, so what customers want is what, and I'm going to be pretty blunt and obvious, is whatever each customer wants, and they segment it into a bunch of different pieces, right? Early adopters of gigabit technology want gigabit technology, and then there's a whole bunch of people who couldn't care less whether it was a pigeon that came to the house so long as the internet worked properly, and who don't understand and have been confused by advertising going forward. Our job is to build networks that are capable of supporting all customers in whatever guise they want, and to future-proof the connectivity of the areas that we're in. I keep talking to Ofcom about questions around customer choice, and Ofcom there to protect the customer. But I would say to Guy that in the large area that we've delivered our network to, nobody can have a TalkTalk connection on a gigabit fiber. They can have a TalkTalk connection on an FTTC copper cable. They can't have it on. So I've now become the de facto, my company has anyway, become the de facto sort of, well, controller of the fast internet, until somebody else builds a network like BT to then allow Guy to come and deliver his product over the Openreach network as it stands right now. So, the question that needs to be answered is that if we are part of the country's evolving landscape of gigabit connectivity, then we need to start answering the question of how we, as the community of altnets, deliver a unified process that allows Sky, TalkTalk et al. To connect to us without there being a huge amount of disruption. How that happens and how that's mandated and how we get to that is a journey that we've got to be on, but we've got to be on it right now, so that the companies that move away from being integrated only with BT Openreach can do so with confidence that they get the same level of support and the same level of technical assurances that they do with Openreach right now. Otherwise, they're not coming.
I want to give, thank you very much, Evan. I want to give Ronan an opportunity to respond, because Ronan, you see a different perspective. You see a European-wide picture. And do you see happening in Europe, is happening in the UK, anything similar to what's happened in Europe previously, or what is happening now? How do we compare in terms of the way we're trying to deliver and work?
So I think what we're seeing in the UK now at the moment has catalyzed some change in thought across Europe. If we look at some of the early deployments in Europe, particularly in the Nordic regions, we had a lot of fiber build out happen 10, 15 years ago. A lot of that was kind of point-to-point fiber infrastructure. In more recent years, we've had kind of Southern European countries, so the Spains, Portugals of this world, countries where they've got very large portions of the populations living in very high density multi-dwelling units. And they've got, let's just say, a more relaxed approach with regard to the rules that have to be adhered to with regard to building out cable, etc. They use a lot of the fascias of buildings, things that wouldn't necessarily be tolerated in some of the other countries across Europe. What we are seeing now is countries that are more closely aligned to the UK, particularly with regard to the geographic split with regard to housing. So once you get outside those very high density urban areas and you start getting very rapidly into single dwelling units, many of which are spread across their own land without neighboring houses directly beside them, the challenges that go with building fiber to those locations are very, very different than the challenges with only focusing in on MDUs. So what we're starting to see now is countries like Germany, for example, is now starting to really ramp up its focus on fiber. I think an awful lot of this is being catalyzed by the new European Electronic Communications Code as well, because when you look into the detail behind that, essentially the code, it calls for the answer is fiber, what's the question? And if it can't be full fiber, it at a minimum really needs to be fiber to the basement or fiber to the last radio head on the network. So, it's pushing very much for a set of infrastructures that can deliver a gigabit experience to every household across Europe. And I think the UK has shown, like what I'm seeing now is with the level of investment that's pouring into the UK and the rise of so many different altnets, they're showing that it can be done. Whether we hit the 2025 target there's a real question mark over that. A lot of us have a question mark over that. And I think skill sets is probably the availability of skill sets is going to be one of the defining factors that go with that. But one of the key things that I think the UK has an opportunity to really set an example for the rest of Europe is how all of these discrete altnets present themselves back to the retail service provider community, those that are not building infrastructure, but those that have the big brand names that are serving as an ISP. Because if every single altnet takes their own unique approach to building their infrastructure and hands off a unique interface and a unique API, it ends up being such a fractured market that it's very, very difficult for the retail service providers to try and engage with that market. Whereas I think what the altnet community is, even though they're going to be geographically separated and operating in their own small pockets, I think what they can do is work much closer together to try and reach agreement on what interfaces should be presented to the retail service provider community, so you get some degree of logical consolidation. So that way the cost of onboarding some of these smaller players is much, much lower. And I suppose the tipping point for relevance becomes much, much lower then at that point.
So Ronan, I think that, I don't know if you've been reading my my crib sheet here, but thank you for raising that. I mean, that's something that I'm very, very passionate about, is making sure that we have some commonality. There is work going on in the independent sector towards a common wholesale platform that will provide some of this. And the whole purpose of that is to support enabling the larger ISPs who we completely acknowledge are going to have to spend millions and millions of pounds to integrate. What we hope is, if we present an interface that allows them to spend that just once, but has access to the entire independent sector, that therefore will make access to a unified way of working, and therefore encourage consumer choice. Mike, I don't want to go into too much detail with consumer-led switching yet. I have a feeling that's going to come in a little bit. But do you think, back to the question I raised, do you think that consumer-led switching will or has the potential to change behavior? And I'd like to answer both questions, please.
Yes, to both. And the reason for that is we have previous in energy, we have previous in other utilities, and we know that's how the typical mass market brand aware consumer behaves. And I think, to answer your second question, this is the challenge for the altnets. We're in the tipping point between being the only game in town for a lot of very high quality services for people that are not available from anywhere else, which has been absolutely brilliant. So now, how do we cope with being in the big boys world when the regulator and BDUK and the consumer themselves are saying, I want to buy what I buy from, insert your favored big provider here?
Okay. I think it's a challenging thought, and I'm quite sure we're going to come back to it. I think it's interesting, James, I'm picking up on a couple of comments that you've been making. And do we think the view is just give the capacity, offer a network that can deliver it, and do not try and second guess what the end user is going to use that for? For me, the risk in doing that is that may well be the right thing to do. And I believe that content will end up becoming more and more available as an OTT service, an over-the-top service. But the question is, when will that happen? I'm personally highly disappointed that the likes of Amazon have not yet stepped into sport in the UK in the way that I was expecting that they would have done by now. I would have thought that would have been a game changer. That would have opened the market. As it is, sport is generally divided into two main providers, BT Sport and Sky Sport. Do we think that the risk for me is that if it takes too long to do that, then simply offering a better network isn't going to attract enough consumers because they don't have the offer, the content that they want. As a panel, what do we think? Do we think that content is king, or do we think that gigabit connectivity is king? And I'm referring to the next 2 years, not the next 10 years, where I completely agree. We can't see what that landscape looks like. Okay, I haven't directed that at anybody in particular, So let me make that a direct question, Bo, to you to start with, please. What do you think?
So I think it actually is a gigabit experience, but I also think that you will very quickly move to the experience of the subscriber being something else. Whether that is actually, to your point, like content is king, or whether it's something over and above that, I'd like to believe it's something over and above that, making the point that if you get access, first of all, if you're a cord cutter, you know what you want in terms of content, and you're going to go and get it from wherever you want, whether that's Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is, right? I don't know too much about UK. I don't live there in terms of the television and sports and stuff, but at least where I live, the offer in terms of television and access to sports is pretty much the same across the major ISPs that I can use. Okay, so for me, it may become something different. And to the interview that was displayed just before this, for me, I think the experience will be defined by something different than speed. Mind you, when we all have fiber access, we all have access to a gigabit per second or beyond anyway, which means the speed is no longer a differentiating factor for the ISP. It has to be something else. If I can get access to the same TV channels, roughly, or sports or whatever, from all of the ISPs, it again becomes something else. And I think if you look at the subscriber experience, it's about peace of mind, it's about obviously reliability of my connection. Then it's also about what I mentioned earlier, actually security. So I see it here, it's connectivity, then it's proper Wi-Fi in the home, and once all that is solved, then I can feel safe, and my kids can feel safe when they browse. I think way more than content is king.
Really interesting, and actually not a view that I had shared myself previously. You're making me think very hard. Thank you very much for the challenge. If we can move it over a little bit now towards legislation, and I don't want to spend too much time in an area that can get very complicated, but I think we do have to go there. Evan, I'm going to give you a voice on this again. I'd like you to give your view on how Ofcom could support the independent sector a little better, and also on how you see differentiation between Area 2 and Area 3 in the in their description of market sectors, market areas.
All right. So I hate government intervention. All right. I've been on record as saying that in the past, because what it does is it makes us behave in a way that would be different to the way that we would have behaved in the first place. But given that it's there and we've got to involve ourselves with it, 2 and 3, you know, there's companies like ours that are happily thriving in Area 3, which makes it Area 2, right?
Correct.
If you think about
Correct.
it. And so, you know, what defines all those different pieces? More importantly, customer choice is really important to me. I mean, really important to me. I'm building a network. I happen to also control an ISP that is, shall we say, virtually horizontally integrated with a bunch of room on my network for other ISPs to join. They're just vacant at the moment, okay? And working to provide a choice to the potential customers on the network is really important to me, okay? And in discussion with the government, I'm making that very, very clear. If we consider Area 3 an intervention, and if you look at Ofcom's desire to give customers choice, then nobody other than Openreach should be building in Area 3. In fact, anywhere, okay? Because there isn't a choice for the customer other than the vertically or the you know, ISP to provide. So I build a network. The customer can only buy from me, and if I get government subsidy to build a network, they can still only buy from me unless the other CPs want to sell a service on the network. So how does that play out? You know, where does that lead to? Because you know, we have to be able to compete on, you know, with these government subsidies of 5 billion. I don't give those 5 billion to anybody. Well, if you do give them to people, you've got to give the customer choice. And if you give it to Truespeed, you're not giving the customer any choice. You're going to get the customer to be able to buy a Truespeed product, and it's going to be brilliant, as all of the products that are on development and delivery here. But there's no choice. So how do you resolve that, government? over to you, please, because then some kind of legislation is required, or some discussion around that is required. Otherwise, and I don't mean to be rude to you, Guy, because you're part of this discussion. It's and I'm not actually being rude. I'm just simply saying that your company will have a commercial view as to what it wants to do, and if it's not compelled to offer a service on networks that are built elsewhere, you're not going to if it doesn't make sense to you. Well, or if it's slightly difficult to do. So how do we move? I mean, maybe Guy can answer this. So how do we move to a process where we have multiple networks that have delivered the gigabit, connectivity that the government wants across the country, but still only provides choice on one of the infrastructures for customers to buy from third-party CPs?
Yeah. Okay, so the question is, sorry, Guy. Guy, yeah, absolutely. I'll come lead across to you on this in a second. The question then is should legislation be put upon the CPs as well as the network operators? And when I discussed this with the legislator, it's been very simple. There's only one company that has significant market power, and that is Openreach, BT. And therefore, they can only legislate on an Openreach or BT situation. They are not, as it's been explained to me, empowered to tell the likes of Sky, TalkTalk, or any other ISP who they should do business with. Now, the challenge then is that correct? Because that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that, Guy, you represent an organization that is at least trying and looking to break that mold. I note that we don't have any representation from Sky or many of the other operators really having an active voice. So over to you, Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. And Evan, I agree with a lot of what you say. Clearly, we at TalkTalk, we are fully supportive of rural subsidies. We would like those rural subsidies to be given to more than Openreach. We think, competition is what created TalkTalk in the first place, that thirst for competition. However, we cannot justify subsidies going to closed shops who can then price gouge to their content, right? Absolutely right. The kind of regulation or the push, it doesn't work in practice. The fact is we can't be forced not having SMP to buy from someone and potentially make a loss. And that is the practical outcome, is that if the operations, the commercials, the technical capability of that altnet is insufficient, we will make a loss and be forced to sell at a loss. And we're not in that situation, we wouldn't do it. Fortunately, I don't think that's the direction of travel. The direction of travel is we are going to collaborate, we are going to come up with a set of standards, and we are going to, between us, take as much of the UK market share as possible. I think a really important thing to think about there is when we talk about competition and we talk about choice, it's not the choice of the altnet, as Evan said. It is the consumer choice to choose which ISP they want. And I think the conversation we had before was really useful, but I think really does miss a trick of what it means to be an ISP. An ISP is not, oh, I put a network in the ground and I've got a tick box that says I sell TV and voice. An ISP means running 1,000-person call centers. It means managing churn. It means supplying your routers. It means managing in-home complexity. Now, I don't know many altnet business cases that are a great 50-year return, but 49 of those years are spent running a bloody painful ISP during that process. You guys are great at building networks. Get on and build networks, build them to a standard and a scale that the large CPs like ourselves can get involved and agree a mutually beneficial deal, and we will go and saturate it. You know what your penetration levels are now. And other than those who work in new build housing, who have an advantage, penetration levels across INCA are going to be sub 20%. The low hanging fruit are one. To get people onto the next level, you need the major CPs to be able to attract that market share and keep that market share. And you need the major CPs to move their Openreach customers onto your network if it is the best available network there. We are up for doing that in the future, and that's what we should be discussing, not trying to get altnets to work out how to supply TV to their 2,000-person customer base, which is a hiding to nothing.
Can I come back in?
Can I add on to that? Because
let's to start with, please, Evan. Thank you.
Thanks. Guy, totally agree. I totally agree with everything you said. But sorry, Philip didn't unmute. So
sorry, 1 second. Sorry, what I said was let's go with Philip's response first, please, Evan.
Yeah, Philip didn't respond.
What you said, let's go with Evan's response first. So, look, I think where Airband is on this is that we take government money for subsidies. BD UK contracts, we have to offer a wholesale service. My reference to 5 years was, I think Airband in 5 years' time will it be getting to exactly the point that Guy said, which says it's just not justifiable to be vertically integrated anymore. We need to move purely to a wholesale play. But until then, I think having vertical integrated income is going to be extremely important to our business case. So the way that we see things evolving is, first we need to get to 100,000 homes passed, when we can then have a sensible conversation with Guy. We need to sit around with other INCA members and get a joined up integrator going so that we can have I guess even parties negotiating kind of how you split the ARPU between a wholesaler and a retailer. We then actually are looking at smaller value-added resellers to help us into the commercial market, but very much, you know, Guy will have a role in increasing our penetration levels, and I think that's got to be the key for smaller altnets. We want it not to substitute our retail customers, but to add to our retail customers with all the other package and the offerings that they can provide, and then we'll have a decision that says how long are we both vertically integrated and a wholesaler.
Understood. Sorry, over to you, Evan.
Okay, sorry for jumping in. Guy, I totally agree with you. Okay, absolutely agree that, you know, we should build networks and we should sell our ports to people who want to sell and who are good at doing the other bits too. But you in my region only have a certain amount of network share, okay, and therefore I need to have an agreement with everybody else that's selling products in the area, not just you. And the key for us to decide is, well, it's brilliant that you're engaging because you're a far-sighted company, but actually Sky needs to engage, and the other large sellers on internet need to engage at the same time in the same process, so that whatever we come up with is shared by the community, okay, and not just by one. So if I do it with you, and then I have to do it with Sky, and then I have to do it with somebody else, one, it's a waste of effort and time. I can damn well almost imagine that what we come back with is a different way of doing it, and that will be dim. And so the communities need to come together now to understand if they want to do it, how they're going to do it, and what it looks like once. I mean, I come from a background of interoperability, bringing national systems to talk to each other, and that comes through standards, and it comes through agreements, and it comes through processes and doctrine, and that needs to be written and understood, and then we can move forward. But until it is, and until it is agreed, then we're just going to be talking about it.
Okay, so there's a couple of things in response to that, and the first is that is exactly where the Common Wholesale Platform is going at the moment. That's what we're trying to put together. It's a project that is open to others to work. It's not a closed shop. It's a project that others are welcome to contribute towards, and we're working on doing that with INCA as a project that Mike has been very, very involved with in ensuring that there are commonality between the way that we work, so that we have that interoperability that you're referring to. So I think we are moving in that direction, and I think it would be unfair if I ignored the most popular question that's coming up on the Q&A at this point. So we're aware that there is a group of independents that are now addressing the commonality issue and are putting together something that is designed to present to the industry to allow the likes of TalkTalk and Sky to come on board with one integration point. But let me read the question. What do we consider the barriers to creating a unified wholesale platform? Aren't CityFibre trying to build one, especially since they have Vodafone and TalkTalk signed up? And Guy, do you know if this is the case? So Guy, this one comes to you.
So I think the barriers of this kind of organisation. Remember, I think we are not. You should not be trying to create a platform that hundreds of resellers and partners can use, because I don't actually think that is the right route to market. People like TalkTalk, and particularly our TalkTalk wholesale division, already have that platform with hundreds of partners connected to. So you are trying to create a platform that can sit between the altnet and 2 or 3 ISPs. And it's worth noting that in TalkTalk, our wholesale division alone, so those broadband sellers who don't have a network, is twice as big as Vodafone's entire broadband footprint in the UK, right? So you don't have to go deep into the ISP chain. You just have to work out how to interact with, as you've called out, a couple of those large providers there. I'm not going to talk about our City Fibre specification, but we have an agreement there to do that.
Thank you.
And clearly there is, options to use similar standards or to create your own ones. My gut feeling is following standards like TM Forum, etc., will create the right consistency we need, and that may or may not be what we do with City Fibre. I won't say, but clearly that they have a way of attracting us. That is mainly down to their build speed and their commercials, and that is driving adoption onto their network. I would suggest, therefore, that the members focusing on commercials and build speed is the way to attract CPs earlier. Clearly, standards have a part to play, but standards without the right commercials, and the right commercials are needed to give the customers the right choice and the right value. It is a component part, Lloyd. So yeah, really useful, but let's get the commercials focused, the business cases right, to drive long-term adoption of all those people who don't even know they want FTTP, who don't know the use cases yet, who don't realise it. Now, over 40% of the country is still on basic broadband on Openreach. They're only at 57% super fast. So actually, there's a lot of people who haven't even gone to fibre to the cabinet. The jump to FTTP is not what they think they need at the moment. So we have to get that right so the whole country is incentivised to move to full fibre. And as we talked about earlier, then the use cases for full fibre really come to fruition when everyone's using it.
It's interesting because I think that covers up on 2 points. Thank you, Guy. I think it covers up on 2 points. One is, if you're telling me that only 40 or 50% of the country, are even looking at faster services at this point in time, yet the chat room is saying, and the feedback generally seems to be, we should be looking as the focus being gigabit connectivity. Clearly, that's not necessarily what is yet driving take up. So I think that challenges that statement personally. And the other thing, I think that if a crude analogy, forgive me for using it, if you have a bunch of no, I can't use the word vultures. If you have one company who would come into using altnets and independent networks, much like vultures when they circle in the sky, one goes down, they all go down. I don't want to use the analogy that you're a vulture. That's crude and not at all what I mean, or opportunistic. And I think what you're doing is leading the way. So it's good that you're doing that. Although it has to be for a price that works on a competitive basis. But I do think that once one company comes down to take part, that will attract the others. So I'm certainly one that says, I like the idea of focusing on one or two companies to bring them into this, and that with that more will follow. Whether that becomes a shared view, we'll wait and see. I'm going to move on to something here that I see keep cropping up. So the sixth most voted question, although it's not a question, it's a statement. Wi-Fi distribution within the home is a key requirement for the consumer. Very large numbers of devices are already common, with over 30 being typical in the home. So we're back to a technology solution here. Bo, in terms of technology, what are you multiple devices connecting in the home?
So I did see that question. I think it's actually a very, very good point, because once we solve the access, you move the bottleneck from the access into the home, but you still have a bottleneck, right? And the customers need to have a good experience. So luckily there we have the Wi-Fi 6 specification, again talking about standards, that greatly improved both the coverage and also the ability to support a large number of devices connected to a gateway. So Calix do provide routers as well as mesh devices that enable you to create a very good coverage and a very good performance of your in-home Wi-Fi solution, both in terms of, let's say, speed to the individual devices, as well as supporting a large number of devices connected to it. Again, based on the Wi-Fi 6 technology.
Thank you. So you have a product range that is supporting that in the home, and I guess it would only be fair of me, given Adtran are in our panel too. Ronan, do you have something that supports the same requirement?
Yes, of course. Wi-Fi 6, I think, is table stakes now, I think, for any credible vendor as we go forward. I think one of the key things that the industry now is starting to pay attention to, and thankfully Ofcom has put the UK in a very strong position now, is the introduction of Wi-Fi 6E using the extended 6 gigahertz spectrum as well. So we've seen over the years on the whole Wi-Fi journey, as the original 2.4 gigahertz spectrum became available and everybody suddenly discovered mobility when their laptop didn't have to be chained to a cable anymore, and broad adoption ensued very, very quickly. And then we started to run into congestion on the spectrum because it was a finite resource. We then moved forward and we saw the introduction of the 5 gigahertz spectrum, and suddenly everything got better again for those that could avail of it. Again, 5 gigahertz is a finite amount of spectrum, so you really need to start looking further down the road. So we've just recently had ratified in a number of countries around the world the introduction of 6E, which introduces the 6 gigahertz spectrum, which is a now even broader range of spectrum that's available. So the devices, the vendors that are bringing those solutions to market, what that allows for is when you bring your meshing solutions into a consumer's home, you can use a dedicated 6 gigahertz channel as backhaul between those mesh nodes and free up all that 5 gigahertz spectrum for the actual devices that are trying to use it. So you can really take that gigabit experience. And when I say gigabit experience, I'm not always talking about 1,000 meg. I'm really talking north of 200 meg. You can take that gigabit experience to all the consumers' devices throughout the entire home. And that's the key part. Like Evan earlier talked about what consumers want. I've heard consistently, whether it's wearing the president of the Fibre to the Home Council hat over the last few years, or it's as Adtran CTO, I've heard consistently that consumers want their broadband to go away. They want it to vanish. They want it like their electricity, that it's just there, it just works. I don't have to fiddle with it every 2 or 3 days to get it to deliver on the value proposition that I've signed up for as a consumer. I've spoken repeatedly within the industry about how the bandwidth always precedes the applications, and we're now seeing, as more and more bandwidth is coming available within the market, we're starting to see the new applications. I talked at the Connected Britain event recently, where we're now entering the ultra high definition era, the proliferation of 4K TV sets across the UK. I think it's, if I remember correctly, it's over 50% of households have one now. And if you look at what's coming out next week now, we're going to see the arrival of the new ultra high definition gaming consoles, where the size of each game is going to be 150 gigabytes in size. Now, can you imagine 2 or 3 years ago, if I had said to you guys, you know, a viable distribution model for your digital content is to send it over the internet and the file sizes are going to be 150 gigabytes in size, you would have been laughed out of the room. But the reality is the bandwidth is rising and the innovators out there are taking advantage of that capacity. And now what we need to do is make sure, as we solve the problem of the pipe into the house, we've really got to take control of that consumer Wi-Fi environment, because at the end of the day, consumers don't buy broadband, they buy Wi-Fi. And you know that because when it breaks, what do they say? Dad, the Wi-Fi is broken.
They do say that. I can tell you from experience, they say that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Evan, of course.
It's, you know, it's something that the consumer actually, as Ronan just says, I mean, we know this because we've done quite a lot of stuff. They don't care about anything. They know about speed because they've been told about speed. And actually we lie to them every time we talk to them. It's 200 megabits is speed, or 400 megabits is speed. It isn't. The speed that they like is the low jitter, low latency, okay, low packet loss. That's what provides speed, and the size of the bearer that's supplying them. So, you know, a consumer on a 200 megabit service with a gigabit bearer and an active Ethernet connection will have almost an identical experience as an 800 megabit customer on a gigabit bearer. And that the speed that they think is the speed is just simply the capacity of how many users can use that network before they see it degrading at an individual level. But we don't tell them that, do we? Because it would just make them go, what? We want to see a speedometer that says 800 megs or 500 megs or 300 or 250, whatever it might be. Okay, because that's what they've been told and that's what they've been trained. So actually, we're selling something which is completely bollocks. Excuse me. And to argue with the customer about that is irrelevant. You're right. They just want it to work. Switch on the internet, everything works. I downloaded my 150 gigabit game in a couple of minutes. It worked brilliantly, whatever it took.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the Gerald Ratner moment there.
No, that's not what I said. I think, you know, we're selling a gigabit bearer to every property that we sell to, you know, on a single fiber. But they don't, to differentiate that from, say, a GPON thing or a piece of FTTC, it doesn't matter. What matters to them is the end experience when they're sitting upstairs trying to do the crossword puzzle in their bedroom and can't get connectivity to their router.
Yeah. I think that the challenge is still in educating the consumer or making the consumer aware.
We don't need
Well, Lloyd, could I cut across there, because I have a big bone of contention with that one, and it's one that I think at a government level that a lot of work is needed for, and that's around advertising standards.
Ronan, before you do, I just want to be very clear. I was going to go on to say, in educating the consumers in understanding the difference between what they are being offered, whether it is FTTC or true FTTP. And I think that is a significant milestone that we've yet to accomplish in terms of the consumer understanding what they're being offered. And that links directly back to what Evan was saying about the quality of what they will then get over the top of that. But please go ahead, Ronan.
Well, the key point, and you've touched on it there, and it's to do with advertising standards. And the Fibre to the Home Council Europe has made a big play on this across the EU Commission and down to the national regulatory level as well. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, the ASA in the UK had ducked this issue, or somebody mentioned it earlier in one of the panels. They've ducked this issue, they've ignored it. I can only speak with experience here in the Irish market, where all the consumers out there were buying everything from fibre-powered broadband to e-fibre to you name it, and all of these were delivered on a copper medium, these services, but they had fibre in the branding. And the Advertising Standards Authority in the Irish market ruled it out and said, no, it's got to be a full fibre connection if you want to call it fibre. Very coincidentally, within months of that, we start to see the incumbent operators and the bigger players really start to ramp up their actual investments in fibre and their build out in fibre across the country. Strange that. Coincidental maybe, but I suspect otherwise.
No, now that they could no longer sell copper as fibre, you mean? Okay.
Correct.
If we look at one of the questions that's being asked, and I think it's a fair question in terms of how it relates to consumer choice, what do we actually feel as a panel? And I'll, please make it clear. I won't direct this at any one particular person. What do we actually feel as a panel about the expected take-up for FTTP nationwide as of 225/230? And how is that going to be influenced? And do we think copper switch off is going to have a material impact in that timescale? So let's go on.
So
with
if I could speak.
Sorry, because of the delay, I was going to go with Mike on that, because I like the.
Okay.
I'd like a technical view as much as the consumer's view on that, Mike. Can you hear us, Mike? That wasn't very fair, was it? He didn't hear that.
Sorry, Lloyd.
Mike, I'm going to bring a question.
Sorry, Lloyd, I had a technical issue. The battery ran out of my headphones. Sorry, could you just restate the challenge?
Yeah, of course. I can try. So the challenge was, in terms of consumer choice, Mike, we're looking at timescales of 225, 230. What do we think FTTP take-up is genuinely going to be like in those sort of timescales? And what impact do we think copper switch-off is going to have on that?
Copper switch-off is going to be extremely important, because at the time of copper switch-off, all of the CPs on the incumbents will, exchange by exchange, bombard their customers with move to fibre. And that's something that we as an industry need to be ready for, because all of this massive marketing activity is going to happen under the all IP switch. The other comment that I will make is, with my mass market consumer hat on, those who know will remember I keep saying I used to work for Amstrad. The moment you start talking to most consumers about the difference between FTTP and FTTC, they'll go, "Whoa, don't care." It's not on their radar. The ASA don't care either, and Ofcom don't much, because certainly with the ASA, they deal in what their research tells them that consumer perceptions are, not what the facts are. And this is something that we're just going to have to live with. As an ex-consumer marketer, I can change this. I can educate the public to an extent to become discerning consumers, but the first thing you need to do is give me Guy Miller's budget. Sorry. I'm not getting at TalkTalk in particular. I am an ex-TalkTalk customer, but if you want me to change consumer perceptions the way that the major scale retailers have done, you need that sort of money, and our industry doesn't. We're going to have to do something clever.
So let's go to the question: what do you think the situation will be in 225 to 230 in terms of FTTP penetration? What's your vision?
Certainly the figures show from our industry that we as a set of independents could reach as many as 20 million homes in the country in terms of homes passed. That's based on the recent point topic surveys and the independents responding to it. I think the challenge for those independents is to make that park, as we used to call it in the motoring trade, make that park of homes passed available to the scale retailers who have the branding to get it cut through to the consumer. So the percentage of actual FTTP sales will depend to a large extent on how we as an industry grapple with that question.
I'm going to put that same question to Philip and to Evan, please. If you can keep your answers fairly succinct, we're down to the last few minutes. Philip.
Who knows? If you're going to push me, I'd say 70 to 80%. I am working on a very fast-moving economy. My mother has just used online banking for the first time. COVID is pushing people into the benefits of broadband, and I don't think it's going to slow down. It will get momentum. TalkTalk and others will help drive demand, and then penetration will follow.
Do you think the question is slightly different if I said to you, take up in areas where the choice is available between FTTP and FTTC?
Yes, because particularly in the rural areas, you have the demographic is a lot older, and people are happy with more of a baseline service. So yes, so they will take some more shifting, some added benefits to over time to get there. But by 2030. I hope so.
And Evan?
Our view is I'm not worried about what the other bits are going. We're just concerned with building as big a network as we can in the interim and providing, until we're able to provide other products, benchmarked internet service provision that people understand and that people want to buy in the way that they want to buy it. And then that's what we focus on.
What do you think the take-up will be, Evan?
I think it'll be 100% because the other technologies will disappear. And if they don't have a choice because copper's being switched off, it can only be fibre, then that would be fibre. You don't buy a house now with an outhouse. All houses have toilets that are inside, right? And there's a reason for that. So it'll be 100% at some point when the networks are finished.
Guy, I'm going to come to you because I have a suspicion you might have quite a bit of research on this.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. The customers don't understand the technology. We're all so involved in it day to day that we assume everyone does, and almost no bugger does. Right? Fundamentally, as Evan called out, speed is a proxy for quality in their mind. It's a nonsense, but it is. And we still have, very 50+% just won't move unless there is incentive to do so. And that will remain like that for years. It is also incredibly important to recognise that our priority is providing a connectivity, of any sort, right? It is more important that they have fibre to the cabinet than they have nothing. So actually, we have to be able to provide a value service to customers. In a post-COVID world, this is of course needed more, but there is less money to go around.
10 seconds, please, Guy.
We cannot leave people out. So Evan's absolutely right. If we can get the commercials right, I mean the end customer pays the right price, we will get to 100%, and TalkTalk will certainly only sell FTTP where it can if the commercials are right.
All right, I think that's been that's a very optimistic and positive note on which to bring this to a close. I think the summary was the questions when we started were: would it be about providing a network that was capable of a gigabit, or is the priority to provide the content? And what we've heard is that you've got to provide the network that's capable of doing it. When it gets to content, in the end, all content will be equal because there will be delivery across everybody's networks. And when content is equal, it's going to be down to the feature-rich services and how you differentiate yourself from one supplier to the other. A challenging time ahead for all of us. Can I thank the panel and everybody for listening? Very much indeed. Malcolm, over to you.
Thanks very much, Lloyd, and thank you to all the panel for your contributions. Really, really useful and helpful. It is the heart of, or this whole debate is at the heart of the work that needs to go on between both the independent sector involved as well with BT and Openreach, and of course the third-party service providers as well. So it's a really hugely important topic. So thank you very much for making the contribution.